Good morning, gamers, and welcome to episode 2 of Critical Damage's 4th season, Emerson's #1 talk show for all things esports and gaming. I'm Ethan Tilley, also known as ET, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Mike and Sam. We've got an awesome show planned for you today, so be sure to grab the popcorn as we jump headfirst into our first topic. Mike, take it away.
So, all right, gamers, today I want to talk about something really important to the gaming industry, especially when it comes to developers of the games themselves. I want to talk about what happens when a game developer drops a game. Should they make a game, release to the public, maybe a bug fix, maybe a patch or two, and then move on, make a sequel, or work on something else, leave the game just to live and die by itself? Or should they release a game and then care for the game over a life cycle, add on to it, put more bug fixes, make the game feel whole, and then when it eventually starts to fade off, that's when you move on? What do you guys think?
Well, I think you're forgetting something really important when it comes to this conversation, which is DLCs. Sometimes a game gets moved on, but also there's added content to it that's not so much a sequel, but it's just additional content. Like Minecraft always adds new mobs and things like that. I wouldn't say Minecraft is going away anytime soon, but they're not really adding anything major to it, at least since the Caves update. There's not really going to be any sort of sequel to Minecraft, but there's always going to be new content expanded on when it comes to Minecraft. So I think just DLC content is really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's important to note just a game that would require a sequel or a game that would be more fitting for a sequel. When you talk about games that have sequels, think about games like in franchises that people know and love. So games like, Legend of Zelda, even Mario, Pokemon. Assassin's Creed is a big one. Assassin's Creed is a huge franchise which creates, I guess, sequels you could call them. I know the original ones were sequels, but this is a game that has a very set-in-stone narrative that the game goes through. And if you want to continue that storyline, sometimes it makes more sense to just make another game that has new mechanics, a new location. It just makes it easier to sort of make everything from scratch from that.
Well, I have to say, I agree with that kind of idea that DLC is important, but if you look at games like some Mario games, they'll just drop it and then kind of just move on, maybe to the next Mario game or something else, especially Nintendo. Pokemon's weird in that they do add a game. They don't add bug fixes. They usually will just drop a DLC, only like the newer games, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, if you look at old Pokemon, it was like a one game and then you moved on to the next one. But, like, which one do you think is better for gamers?
I think consistent maintenance on the game you're currently focusing on is really important to keep your audience. Because if there's a bunch of bugs and there's a bunch of old content, people are going to want to consistently run through it. But say you have a sequel coming up in like a year, but you need some content to fill in the meantime so that people are still interested in the series, you can always add in a DLC. I think also it really just depends on, like ET was saying, what type of content you're going for. Because with Pokemon, there's a series, there's plot. It's not just finished within one game. But a lot of like story games, those can't really be finished within. They are finished within one game. You can have a DLC that expands on like the story within that universe, but there isn't always enough for it to be an entire series. Pokemon's really cool, in which there's just forever new content that we can explore, and new regions, and new trainers, and all that sort of thing. But say like, trying to think of an indie game here. Cult of the Lamb, just a new one that I'm going to bring up here. Very simple game, simple mechanics, has a very thought-through plot that start to end, you get it all within one game. They talk about adding like new followers and things like that, but that's really all they've really been talking about adding. I think also especially because it's a new game. But the plot's finished at the end of the single game. So they want to just keep expanding on that game to have this continuous DLC content and new interest for more audience. It's not so much they want to continue the series because there's just not really that much to continue at that point. It's they want to see how they can make it fun for new audiences and for keeping their old audience. So that's where DLCs come really in handy. They're not really giving away that game or moving on to a new series. They're trying to keep it fresh.
That's true, but also could you look at DLCs as kind of like, not a scapegoat, but kind of just a way for developers to maybe not make a fully finished game? I mean, like, especially with DLCs I've kind of played, like, I've always felt like the game was lackluster and they're just asking me pay a little bit more for the game that I feel like, in my opinion, should have been released up front with the game. I mean, like, if I pay $60, $70 now for a game as like a AAA title, I don't want to spend another $20, $10, even like $30 just to get like a couple new maps, new skins, new whatever a DLC is going to include, I feel like that might just be too much.
Yeah, and I think going back to Pokemon, I think Pokemon's a special case, especially in reference to DLCs, because as you said, older Pokemon games, they didn't have DLC specifically. You would have the original 2 games that would release, Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, Ruby, Sapphire, but then instead of just adding DLC, they would just create an entire 3rd game that was set in the same region, but then they'd add all those bug updates, all those quality of life fixes in that 3rd game. But it didn't really make much sense back then, because when you really think about it, people would have to start a new game all over again just to get those bug fixes and play the definitive version of that region. So if you wanted to play through Gen 3, what's the point in playing through Ruby or Sapphire when you could play through Emerald instead? They've been starting to do DLCs now with Sword and Shield, but I think that's more of a better fit for Pokemon anyway, because rather than spending all this time and resources into making a 3rd game that you're going to have to start playing through again, it just makes more sense to have a DLC to add on to your game with your current team and your current Pokemon. That way you don't lose them.
I think there's also something to say about game crunch when it comes to releasing DLCs and new content, because there's a sort of expectation on which you want a certain amount of content in a game that you're paying $60, $70 for. But if there's a lot of content that's for $60, $70, then that's good and great. And if they add on new content, that's also really great. But I think they should be paid for that, and it takes a lot of time to be able to do that, because you don't want to just tell developers, oh yes, we want all of this content immediately, right here, right now, because that's where a lot of unhealthy habits in development start to happen. So I think DLCs, at least if it's a good DLC, don't get me wrong, it's an expansion on the content in which the audience is going to enjoy, and it's something fresh and new, and it isn't just one little thing. Like, going back to Cultural Limb here, they recently added, like, Pog followers, which I think is hilarious, like the lizard. And it's, like, a fun new thing for people to enjoy. It's something smaller, it's free, and it's just new, fresh content. I guess a bigger version of DLC that we can talk about, too, is Monster Hunter. They also do series, but their DLC is sick. They have Iceborne, which, to be fair, it costs like $60 to get. But it's also basically an entire new game that you add on to Monster Hunter World. It released an entirely new map, which is huge and gorgeous. Like, all of the graphics are amazing. And then, like, 10 new monsters, I think some variants of old monsters too, a giant new boss, like, bunches of armor and things like that. Like, it is worth $60 for that DLC. And I don't think that if they released it at the same time as Monster Hunter World, it would have been as good as it is now if they didn't take that time to develop it and make sure that Iceborne was as good as it is currently.
So with Monster Hunter specifically, I want to take this opportunity to kind of get your guys' opinion as gamers. Do you like DLCs more? Like, do you like them adding on to a game? Or would you rather a developer makes a game and then they move on to the sequel? Like, Monster Hunter is a good example of that. Like you said, it was a full, like, expansion, $60. That's practically a new game, but they're calling it DLC. Understandably, you want to keep the same concepts within that Monster Hunter game, but is it better to just make a new game? What's your guys' stance as gamers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to discuss just the different kinds of DLCs, which we've already gone over a little bit, but I think it's all on a case-by-case basis. I think when talking about games, there's no one correct answer, I guess. When talking about DLC, there's so many different kinds of DLC. There's free DLC, there's paid DLC, and I think especially in reference to paid DLC, it all depends on what the actual DLC is in order for the consumer to really think if it's worth it or not. If a consumer believes that, hey, I want to spend 30, 40 bucks, get this brand new like campaign or extra stuff added to this game I already play a bunch, then yeah, they'll think it's worth it, they'll pay the money, and it's a really good benefit to the game, and it really adds on to the game's life cycle as well. Because making that DLC for that game sort of keeps that game in people's minds. It allows people to keep playing it even past the main sort of storyline is over. But especially when talking about like live service games and games that just, I guess, get continuous updates, you don't really need to worry about that because they're continuously being updated. Think a game like Minecraft, which, you know, adds new mobs, adds new updates every now and then, keeps the game fresh. You don't really need to make a second Minecraft. And I think that's a totally separate circumstance where you don't need to worry about DLC, and I think it knows exactly what it's trying to do in terms of how it wants to monetize itself.
It removes Herobrine every patch. I guess for me, If it expands on the plot, that's what I love. I don't care if it's DLC or sequel. I just want to know how the characters are doing because I'm just really into plot. But I think when it comes to any sort of game, especially with life cycle in mind, just continuous love and maintenance if that game is something that they want to continue on. Because whether it be DLC or sequel, you're showing that you want to continue on in this series and that you respect the game that you've made and put time into, and that you want your audience to really like that game as well. And DLCs, I think, are more so for normally for smaller things and updates and that sort of thing, just to keep focused on the original game. But if it is like Pokemon or Assassin's Creed or something like that, where there's a whole bigger plot that can't be fit into one game, then it makes more sense to do sequels and have a sort of series going, because you can't fit all of that plot and universe into a single game.
I get what you guys are saying. I want to take this discussion and I want to take it because you guys seem to have the idea that, yeah, it's good for a game to breathe as it goes. So how do you feel about companies starting to shut down games? I mean, the biggest example right now is Overwatch and Overwatch 2. They just gutted the servers of old Overwatch or Overwatch 2. You have other examples of Stadia completely shutting down their platform, and you have Super Smash Bros. Trying to make Ultimate the new Smash Bros. Game, and it's just not really working. Do you think it's good that developers want people to play their new game by getting rid of the old one? Or do you think just let it be?
Yeah, I think when it comes to talking about games that are taken away, that normally refers to live service games that developers decide, hey, we don't want to support this anymore and we want people to stop playing them because we have a new game coming out and we want people to play that. So especially with Overwatch, it's important not to split that player base too much, because if you have people still playing Overwatch 1, then Overwatch 2's player base suffers, queue times are long, no one's able to actually get into games, and it overall seems like a pretty rough situation in general. But unfortunately, I think we have to cut this a little short and move on to our next segment. So let's head over to Jack Reiber for First Frame News.
Thanks, ET. Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Frame News. My name is Jack Reiber, and I'll be walking you through the biggest headlines in the gaming world. Starting with our first story of the day, Cloud Strife fixed the housing crisis, or more specifically, the developers of Final Fantasy XIV did. A widely popular online RPG, Final Fantasy XIV features an in-game housing market similar to that of the real world. Players can purchase homes for their characters using in-game currency, and in 2017, there was a homelessness crisis. Yeah, you heard me right. You can go homeless in Final Fantasy XIV. A group of affluent players bought out neighborhoods and left tons of players without any homes for sale. This housing crisis caused the game's player base to drop significantly. The game developers tackled this issue in a recent update last year, which expanded the number of houses for sale by almost 5,000 and prohibited players from monopolizing property. And wouldn't you know it, the housing crisis was resolved. Players can find themselves some nice, affordable housing in the new Final Fantasy economy. Moving from one financial issue to the next, voice actor Helena Taylor, famous for her role in the Bayonetta series, faces backlash for not returning to her iconic role. Taylor voices the lead character in the Bayonetta games and turned down the role for the series' third installment. Taylor shared that Bayonetta developer Platinum Games offered her only $4,000 to return to the role. Recent articles from Bloomberg and VGC contradict Taylor's story, saying she was offered $4,000 per recording, totaling up to $15,000 for the game. Taylor denies these reports and confronts fans who call her a liar and a gold digger on social media. She tweeted on October 24th that, quote, "I am a team player. I was just asking for a fair, living wage in line with the value that I bring to the game," end quote. A game that she reminds fans is part of a $450 million franchise. Now let's shift gears over to the fighting game world. The Street Fighter VI closed beta ran from Friday, October 7th to Monday, October 10th to thunderous success. The beta came jam-packed with content featuring a character creator, an open-world lobby, training mode, shop for character customization, daily challenges, and even a DJ booth? Oh, did I forget to mention there is a crunchy fighting game on top of all this? Players went head-to-head in casual and ranked matchmaking or open tournaments all weekend long and near flawless rollback netcode. Capcom set a new industry standard for what closed betas can accomplish, and there's only more to come leading up to the game's release next year. A new mob makes its way into Minecraft. On October 14th, fans voted for which mob they wanted to be added to the game. The Rascal and Tough Golem put up a good fight, but the Sniffer came out on top of the polls. According to the Minecraft official website, the Sniffers are an ancient mob, quote, known for their horticultural skills. They're the only ones who can find long-lost ancient seeds that you can grow into new and unique plants, end quote. They went extinct some time ago, but players can find a sniffer egg in the underwater ruins to revive the species. You can help sniffers thrive once again when update 1.20 drops next year. While the sniffer finds new life, Google Stadia comes to a close. Google begins its plans to shut down Stadia. Developers across the country are heartbroken. The Kodum Swider of SourceFight Studios received news of Stadia's shutdown after working 4 months to bring indie game Jump Challenge to the platform. Swider and many other game developers were blindsided by Google's decision, sharing in an interview with ours that, quote, during our correspondence with Google, nothing showed us that it could be the end of the Stadia, end quote. Now, Stadia only has 3 months to live before its complete shutdown in January. Digital-based gaming services like Google Stadia have the power to execute mass shutdowns like this. My good friends at the desk have much more to say about it. And it's a good thing, too, because I gotta get out of here. Modern Warfare is out right now, and I don't want to miss a single second of it. I don't care that it's $70. I want to get in it right now. I'm Jack Reiber. This is Gaming News. I'm sending it back to you, ET.
Thanks, Jack. And honestly, that's a pretty good talking point to talk about here. Talking about Stadia and digital gaming. Let's talk about digital versus physical games for a minute and the differences between the two, pros and cons. So let's talk about digital games first.
I think that's a great topic. That's actually exactly what I was going about. Crazy how that comes up. But digital and physical games are such a weird dynamic. I mean, like, you have to admit, like, physical games are really only a thing that come up in console discussions, but I feel like they should be talked about. When you think about digital and physical games that you own through your console or through your PC are very useful, yes, but what are the cons that comes with them? What do you guys think? Do you guys think one is better than the other?
I'm very pro digital. I think that also comes with the fact that I just lose things really easily. So having all of my games on one Switch or one PC just makes it so much easier for me, because say I'm like moving or something like that, or like I'm traveling for the day and I want to bring my Switch with me. I have to decide what games I'm bringing. If I lose one, that's like $60 down the drain. I'd much rather just have everything digital and be able to keep it with me at all times.
So you see it as a convenience of digital gaming.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any thoughts?
That's a good point. I mean, the fact that physical media is tough to keep track of, there's lots of discs, lots of cartridges. I mean, cartridges are so small that they're super easy to lose. I know I've lost plenty throughout my lifetime. But also there's a couple of cons with digital gaming that I think it's important to talk about, especially talking about specifically the fact that you don't actually own that game. A lot of digital games is sort of just giving you the license, the ability to play that game, but you don't necessarily own a physical copy of it, so it could be taken away at any point. I think that's really important to talk about.
Yeah, that is a fair point. But once you have it downloaded, it's pretty secure at least. If you can play it offline when it's downloaded, you pretty much own the game. They can't really take that away from you unless they like go onto your computer and just forcibly uninstall it for you.
That's the thing too, though, is if a game requires an internet connection and servers shut down, it's going to be tough to actually get access to that game. You're going to have to rely on things like community-based servers and other servers that people have to make from scratch. And that may not necessarily run as well as servers hosted by the company itself.
I mean, you could say the same somewhat for physical, though. Like, say Overwatch. There's physical copies of Overwatch. There's digital copies of Overwatch. If the server just goes down, period, both are unusable.
True.
That's a good point to bring up, but Overwatch, to be fair, Overwatch 1 disc, if you still have them, they just log you into Overwatch 2 now, which, don't get me wrong, I'm fully in support with. That means that if you bought the Overwatch 1 disc, you can keep playing it. It's really good for console players. But moving along a little bit, I want to talk about how when it comes to this, is it good for like the environment, for the sellers? Do you think that us as gamers are really getting more out of digital gaming or physical gaming?
I mean, I think one of the major aspects of physical gaming that is often overlooked is just the collecting aspect of it. People love collecting games. People love seeing all the cool cover art, opening the case, getting the little instruction manual, and like all the little like bits and details that the developers decide to put in that, you know, you sometimes may not get in a digital game by just booting it up for the first time. And these massive game collections between consoles and games and cartridges and CDs, You don't get that with digital games as much. Sure, you get to see like a whole list of all the games you have in like a Steam library, but being able to collect and actually feel your collection in front of you it's a pretty cool feeling.
Yeah, that is a really cool feeling. But also the environmental impact that having all of these digital or physical copies can have, because that's a lot of plastic, that's a lot of metal, it's just a lot of resources. Being able to have all of these digitals can be a lot better for the environment in the long run. Because say you're like a AAA and a bunch of people are going to get your game. If you do it all digital, at least if that's your choice, then that's so many resources that A, it's cheaper. B, you're not using all of these physical resources that are just going to end up, a lot of them, just tossed out. Because I don't know how many collectors there are in the world, but mostly you just keep the cartridge it came in and then the disc itself, unless you have like a disc holder. So anything else kind of gets just thrown to the side. So it's like a lot of paper receipts. It's a lot of just trash that you don't really need at the end of the day.
Thing is with digital though is you need servers to actually host all of that. In order for a service like Steam, it's not like you have all these Steam servers that are up and running, and that could also be detrimental to the environment. There's a lot of power that goes into running those and making sure it's always up and running, making sure people always have access to buy these games. Sure, you're not necessarily manufacturing like physical plastic, but the environmental impact of running that many servers could also be pretty scary.
So I guess there's really no better way, at least looking at it from an environmental standpoint. Maybe let's look at it financially. I mean, like with game companies now, I mean, like if game companies release a game over digital, they don't have to go through GameStop, and they don't have to create discs, they don't have to create packaging. If that hits to consumers with collectibles especially, do you think it's still okay?
I mean, it's tough because it really depends on how big collectors actually are in the gaming industry. And there's also alternatives, right? Just because you release a game digitally doesn't mean you can't release something for collectors. You can also release like merchandise and all this other stuff that collectors could still enjoy, or even a collector's edition of a digital game. There are games that are released digitally that then come out with a physical collector's edition later that has all these like cool knickknacks in it and really cool details that the collectors get to enjoy, but there's still only, so many of those collector's editions, so it's not as impactful as fully releasing physical.
I would say in terms of affordability, digital is probably the better way to go just because you're not paying for all that extra packaging. But having a physical collectors, especially if you are a collector, can be a really fun addition. So average gamer, I'd say probably digital is better because especially if you're going to be playing the game a lot, you want to have it on you at all times. You don't really need all of the fancy extra things, which are cool, but you don't really need them. It can save like $10, maybe more, off of a game. When it comes to having the collectors, though, it can be really fun, especially if it's a series that you really love. So I think having the option of physical is important, but I think also really having the option of digital for people who can't really afford to get a physical copy or who are like me and will lose it in like 5 minutes is very important.
Okay. So I kind of get what you guys are saying. So I want to talk about subscription services, but before that, I think we should also look at digital gaming. I'm throwing a bone to you guys in that digital gaming, Steam gets sales a lot. I mean, like GameStop does not slash a price every summer for people to buy a game. Digital games do that. I just wanted to throw it out there. I feel like that's a good talking point. Do you guys have anything to discuss about that before we move on to subscriptions?
The Steam summer sales are one of my favorite times because games go for so cheap, and especially on affordability too. That's just great because if you've been looking at this game for like months and months, and then all of a sudden you get that little notification in your email of like, hey, look, this game you just wishlisted is 50% off. You're gonna get so excited. It's gonna get more sales for the game. It's gonna get more sales for Steam, and you're gonna end up with this shiny new content that you've been waiting for a really long time. Physical doesn't really tend to do that.
Yeah, and I honestly, it's tough to underestimate the importance of accessibility with that too. The fact of the matter is, in order to get a physical game, you have to either order it online or actually go in person to like a GameStop or game store in order to get the game physically. And that may not necessarily be an option for a lot of people. So being able to just buy the game right then and there on a platform that you already have installed on your computer, it makes it so much easier. And it makes it a lot more accessible to people who may not be able to play the game otherwise.
I want to say also, especially on game day of release, because I'm just thinking of all the people who wait outside GameStop and things like that for like the new Pokemon games and things like that, like the lawn chair people.
The 10-hour shopping lines.
Right, yeah. So if you don't really want to go through that, but you want to play it like at the time of release, you can do that with digital, because digital will immediately release around the same time that physical does. So you can get it before waiting on that 10-hour line.
Yeah, I think there's also, I think another point for physical, though, is the fact that everything is, in fact, on that cartridge, and there's nothing necessarily to download, and download times and download speeds. Because when you buy a game digitally, you're going to have to download it no matter what. You're going to have to download to your computer, and yeah, it may take some time, especially if it's a pretty hefty game with lots of gigabytes. But for most physical games, I feel like everything's already on the disc. Pop it in, play, and you're done. You don't need to worry about download time. I always think about those stories of the parents who like get games for their children for Christmas, and they pop it in, and they have to wait for download times in order to even play their game on Christmas morning, which is a whole other topic of being forced to download things, even on a physical disc. But I think in general, physical discs allow that for convenience as well. Just being able to pop a disc in, not worry about download time, and then boom, you're just ready to play the game that you bought.
All right, well, moving on from a little bit of a tangent I took us on, what do you guys think about subscriptions? I mean, like, subscriptions help games, do they, or do they not?
I think subscriptions are nice, because especially if you're a newer gamer and you want to kind of have the experience of having all these big bundles without having to pay the cost for getting all of those big bundles, having like a $10 a month subscription to a library where you can get all of these games is a very nice thing to do, especially like say you end up liking a game more than the others. I know some subscriptions offer opportunities as to where you can buy it for cheaper if you are subscribed. So I think Xbox Gaming has Sea of Thieves. Say you end up really liking Sea of Thieves, they'll give you a discount on it. So then you can buy it, and then you can just have it to play whenever you want after that. You don't need to get the subscription. And then if you find that you don't like the other games on the subscription, you can easily cancel the subscription. So it's really just a good way to find what you like without having to pay like $20 per game.
Yeah, and honestly, subscription services, again, that point of just being able to try things out can't be understated. Being able to just pop a game on for a couple minutes, be like, hey, this isn't a game for me. I don't need to worry about playing this. I can just go and play a game that more appeals to my kind of gameplay. I think subscription services are a good idea. I think as long as things don't get out of hand in terms of pricing, in terms of how people are actually able to access these games, I think they're in a good spot right now. Being able to play Game Pass and being able to play, what's PlayStation's? I believe it's like PS Now or something.
No, I don't use PlayStation.
Yeah, I don't have a PlayStation, so I wouldn't know. But again, most of these companies have a subscription service that allows you to just play all these games and try them out. Obviously, you don't get the collecting aspect of it for the game that you want to hold physically, but again, I don't think subscription services are for those kinds of collectors anyway.
Also kind of going a little bit off topic here, but in terms of bundles, I know digital, they'll do charity bundles where there's like 100 games for like $10 to charity, which you could not do that with the physical. Imagine all of those boxes carrying home. But it's for a good cause, and you get a bunch of cool games that you can try out, and it's an opportunity that's really only available for digital because it's just so many games you have to get and download. And I think it's just a cool opportunity for people who are looking to try out new games where maybe they don't want to do a subscription. They can donate to a good cause and get like a bunch of indie games that they would have never tried out, because indie games don't really get tried out a lot. So it's just a fun new experience with a bunch of new content. And
all right, so I think that's a good place to stop that for now. That's going to be the end of Critical Damage Season 4, Episode 2. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.